Please be seated.
Mr. Free,
Yes.
before you proceed, I just want to ask the brother a couple of questions, if I could. Brother, you are all within the Christian Brothers, as in many other orders, known as brothers. That's true, isn't it? And that implies a family relationship. Is that how you would see the Christian Brothers?
That's correct.
And in that sense, in your role in governance, because as a visitor that's a formal, structured governance system, did you not find that dealing with other brothers in a familial way could create a conflict of interest? In other words, you weren't independent, you were tied to these people, and that would affect your judgment.
The role of provincial and the role of those who work with the provincial as councillors is well established and accepted by the congregation and certainly within our own province. And while there's potential for some such conflict, over time, the way that the provincial and team relate to those brothers has developed to minimise any such potential to come to light. And where there might be, in any given instance, a conflict, there's always the option, of course, given that we've got a team, to use the resources of the team and to avoid any personal conflict that might be there between A and B. So at a personal level, I'd just have to say that I haven't experienced any conflict. I do know what you're referring to, and I understand the potential involved in that, but I'd have to say, in terms of my own experience, that I haven't felt that.
So you're saying to us that a culture in which brothers were encouraged to regard themselves as family would not affect judgment about matters which might mean that one of the family could end up in serious trouble for misconduct with children.
It did not lead me to move away from, resile or deny any of my own responsibilities. And I'm sure that applied to those who worked with me on provincial councils.
So in a choice between acting on a report of misconduct of a child at a school and one of your fellow brothers, that would not interfere with your judgment as to what action you should take?
No, not at all.
Can we have document 283, please? Brother, this is an email that you wrote in October of 2009, and you'll see from the subject heading, it's an inquiry about first knowledge. And you say, firstly, can you tell us who Joseph Bucci is? Can you tell us who Joseph Bucci is, please?
Joe Bucci was an employee of Catholic Church Insurances.
Okay. So this was an email to CCI addressing the issue that I raised with you first thing this morning about when the Christian Brothers first acquired knowledge of certain brothers being subject of abuse complaints.
That's correct.
So you deal, part of the email has been blacked out, and you deal with one brother that is CCK, and then you go on to say this about Ted Dowling. First knowledge by Provincial Council of the day was August 1993, and you've got a note there. This was really the date of the first knowledge of any real substance that the Provincial Council of the day had in relation to any cases of alleged sexual abuse at the hands of any Christian brothers in what was then St Patrick's Province. Now, in terms of your approach to this issue, is it the case that in 2009, when you talked about first knowledge by the Provincial Council, you were talking about first knowledge by the Council or any of its members? Is that right?
Yes, basically.
And that was CCI's approach, that if a member of the Council knew something, it was taken to be knowledge of the Provincial Council?
Yes.
Now, I've taken you this morning through at least 4 matters predating 1993. There was the information conveyed to Superior Ron Stewart about the complaint that Brother Dowling had taken photos in the showers. There was the complaint that the parent tried to make to Brother Dylan at the Cathedral College in East Melbourne in 1985. There was the visitation report from 1988 relating to St Mary's in Geelong. And then I also took you to the statement by the lay teacher, Mr Thompson, about his attempts to complain to Brother O'Halloran at St Mary's in Geelong in 1987 or 1988. Now, by 2009, you were aware of each of those historical matters, weren't you?
Yes.
And you nevertheless reached the conclusion that the first knowledge by the Provincial Council wasn't until a later date, that is August 1993. Now, is that because you had concluded that those complaints had not reached the Provincial Council or any of its members?
Let me give you a little context. This email was a response to a phone call, and we don't have the phone call set up here. The email states that, and the phone call, on the best of my memory, asked about specific instances in relation to 2 or 3 brothers.
Yes.
So this comment really needs to be understood in the light of the inquiry that was being raised by CCI in relation to particular brothers and relating to firm sort of complaints that had been raised with the brothers so that they could satisfy themselves in relation to prior knowledge issues. And what I'm saying here is that we didn't have any formal complaints raised with us. That's all. And that's whether the language is good enough is a question. That's what the of any real substance is meant to convey. That's not meant to comment on the issues that you've already referred to earlier about the Mark O'Loughlin comment, etc. The any real substance is meant to refer to specific complaints raised by an individual where those complaints had to be addressed. That's all that's about.
So you're suggesting that it reflects a conclusion you had reached, that although information suggesting that Brother Dowling had a problem with his behaviour with children might have reached the Provincial Council, the information didn't reach the level of knowledge of real substance?
No formal complaints as such had come to the Provincial Council. That's what that means.
Well, can you explain what a formal complaint is?
Formal complaint is the sort of issue that might be addressed by the Professional Standards Office.
And how does it come about?
That might come about because Mrs. Smith or John Smith writes a letter and says, I was abused by Brother Dowland at Cathedral College in 1986, and these are the circumstances, and I want the matter addressed.
Brother, just take the allegation of photographing boys in the showers. That's obviously sexually oriented misconduct, isn't it?
I accept that.
You accept that?
I accept that that's sexually oriented behaviour.
Yeah, and plainly misconduct.
And it's misconduct, I accept that too.
Yeah, and serious.
And I accept that it's serious.
And has real substance because it came from knowledge within the brothers themselves, didn't it?
It seems to have.
How can you say that there was no knowledge of any real substance, even just looking at that one allegation?
Well, I just simply want to say that wasn't in my consciousness in terms of the context of the phone call, and that's what this refers to, from Joe Bucci about specific instances. That's my response to that.
Well, are we in the position where what you responded to Mr. Bucci just wasn't true?
I'd say it didn't cover that instance.
Sorry?
I'm saying it did not cover that instance.
So what you said wasn't true?
It didn't cover the whole story. Not by design, I must say.
Well, it was a pretty serious question that Mr. Bucci was asking, wasn't it?
He was asking me about specific instances, and that wasn't part of my consciousness in responding to him.
It was a serious question he was asking you.
Well, I accept that.
He expected you to take steps to ensure that the answer you gave was honest and true, didn't he?
It was a phone conversation.
Yeah, but nevertheless, you understood he was looking for you to be honest and true in your answer.
I was being honest.
You weren't being truthful, though, were you?
I was being truthful to the best of my consciousness.
Brother, just coming back to the question about what constitutes a formal complaint, would a parent ringing the principal of a school to say, my son has been sexually abused by Brother Dowland, constitute a formal complaint against Brother Dowland?
That would that'd be the start, I think. I think that's a complaint at a school level, and for that to become something that gets into a provincial council basket, that needs to be documented, and that needs to be able to be processed in some fashion. So I'd say that's the beginnings of a formal complaint.
I think you accepted...
Potentially.
Sorry. I think you accepted earlier this morning that, to the best of your recollection, Brother O'Halloran passed on that complaint. I'm sorry. I withdraw that. Brother O'Halloran, having received the complaint from a teacher, would have passed that on to the Provincial Council. Is that right?
It seems from the report that he spoke with Brother O'Loughlin about that.
Yes. Would that then make it a formal complaint that had reached a sufficient point in the hierarchy to be treated as one?
I don't know how formalised that was. It seems to me that it probably wasn't formalised. It seems to be that there was no record of anything particularised about the boy and what happened in terms of his position at St Augustine's, let alone relationship to St Mary's and Ted, and let alone that matter getting to a provincial council. So I suspect that wasn't formalised.
Because, in effect, it wasn't documented. Is that what you're saying?
Sorry?
Because it wasn't documented?
I can't hear you.
Because it wasn't documented, no one wrote it down. Is that why you're saying it didn't become a formal complaint?
I don't think it was formalised.
Can we have, please, document 157? This is a letter that was written by Mr. John Schiller, who had been the Deputy Director of the St Vincent's Boys' Home, and he wrote it to the Provincial in 1996. Can you remember this being brought to your attention back in 1996?
I don't recall that.
All right. I'll show you the relevant part and see if it jogs your memory. Mr. Schiller explains some of the problems they have at St Vincent's with dealing with boys who've been sexually abused and the need to get them to a point where they expect not to be abused. And he is expressing his shock to find out that that might have been compromised by the presence of Brother Dowland. And he says this at the bottom of the screen there: I take note of your congregation's position that the brothers were unaware of Brother Dowland's tendencies and activities. I cannot accept this as a reasonable position. I cannot believe that the number of allegations against this man could have been kept from his various communities and the congregation's superiors. I find that expecting the public to believe this is preposterous. I do not believe this plea of ignorance. Did the Provincial raise that with you after he got this letter?
This letter?
Yes.
I assume so.
Why do you assume so?
Because it's a letter of some note.
Yes. It's a very strong objection to the position that the Christian Brothers were taking, isn't it?
Yes.
What was your reaction to this extreme scepticism about the plea of ignorance?
Can you just flick back to the date of the letter?
Yes, certainly. It's July of 1996.
I would have just finished on the leadership team, so I don't know just when I actually saw the letter and whether I saw it as a member of the leadership team.
Yes.
So I can't make a comment on it, I think, as a member of the leadership team. But I would add that I did see it at some later stage as part of working professional standards.
Yes.
And I am prepared to say that the position that John Schiller takes is not an unreasonable one.
Is that one that you now share?
Yes.
So you also now accept that?
I'm saying that the position that he takes, I understand.
Right. And I'm asking you, beyond understanding with it, do you also agree with it? That it is not true that the Christian Brothers had no prior knowledge of Brother Dowland's?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying I understand the position that he took in this matter.
Sorry, I'm not sure we're understanding. Perhaps you can just have a go at it again.
Yes. You understand that Mr. Schiller had reached the conclusion that the superiors and the provincial leadership, as he refers to in his letter, must have known prior to 1993 that Brother Dowland was sexually misbehaving with boys. You understand that was Mr. Schiller's?
I understand what he's putting.
Yes. And you've said you now think that his point of view was a reasonable one. Is that right?
I understand where he's coming from.
Yes. And I've asked you the additional question, have you now come around to the same view that the superiors within the community and the provincial leadership team did have knowledge prior to 1993 that Brother Dowling was behaving in a sexually inappropriate way with boys?
No, I would say the provincial and team had suspicions, not knowledge, suspicions.
Well, can you answer me this? If you've got suspicions about a teacher and someone who's become a headmaster of sexual misbehaviour with children, is it responsible to leave that person in a position where the suspicions might be able to be carried out?
I'd say no.
Well, can you explain to us then how it was that the brothers let this happen?
The position that he was in at St Vincent's wasn't as a teacher.
I'm sorry?
The position that he was put into was a coordinating role. The special school wasn't an ordinary school. It was a school where his role was to actually coordinate the teachers.
All right, but he's in the school with the children, isn't he? Brother, he's working in the school.
It wasn't an ordinary school at all.
Maybe not.
However, I don't want to labour that point, but his role was not
If the leadership of the brothers had these suspicions, how did it happen that this man was allowed to be anywhere near children in the care of the Christian brothers, be it a school, special school, or some other facility? How did that happen?
In retrospect, I would simply have to say that I couldn't now support the action then taken.
Does it mean that the leadership of the brothers just turned a blind eye?
No, it doesn't mean that at all.
Well, what does it mean?
It means that we were not alert enough to the possibility of things going wrong.
And why was that? You had suspicions, which you say should have meant that he was taken away from children. Why weren't you alert enough?
Well, I can't answer why we weren't alert enough, but I can attest to the fact in the light of history that became revealed later.
Brother, in that answer, are you indicating to us that there was some consciousness of a problem with respect to Brother Dowling, and that's why he wasn't put in a teaching position at St Vincent's?
I think that's probably true, but he's not being put in a teaching position wasn't associated in its entirety with this issue of sexual abuse at all. It was associated with his capacity to relate to young people, it was associated with his maturity, it was associated with his capacity just to relate to people. It was a broader question than any issues about sexual innuendo.
So you have a recollection of that?
I've got a vague recollection of the decision-making associated with his being placed in the special school. And maybe even a slight sort of feeling that this might be a questionable decision.
At the time, you had that slight feeling?
Yeah, but it's a vague recollection now, some 20 years on.
Thank you. I want to ask you about Brother BWX, now. Brother Brandon, can I ask you again, please, to have a look at the list of pseudonyms?
Yes, I know.
Do you know who BWX is? I think again on the second page. Can you see BWX? Thank you. Can we have, please, document 245? You'll see from the heading, this is a Professional Standards Resource Group assessor's record sheet into an allegation by BWU of sexual assault by Brother BWX whilst at Christian Brothers Warrnambool in 1963-1964. And if we could turn over to .0032, you'll see that Brother BWX was interviewed as part of this process in October 2003, and you were, see there at the end of paragraph 28, you were in fact present during the interview as his support person. Do you remember attending that interview?
Yes, vaguely, but I do, yes.
And a number of matters were put to Brother BWX. I just want to ask you about a few of them. If we could go down to the bottom of .0033. There was, just before we come to paragraph 45, to explain the context, Father Madden had become aware of concerns. He's given a statement to the Commission. Have you had a chance to read Father Madden's statement?
Yep.
So you understand that Father Madden had heard rumours that concerned him, or statements by students about the need to be careful around Brother Dowland, and he had passed that on to Brother Williams because he was concerned.
Wasn't about Brother Dowland.
I'm sorry, you're quite right. Brother BWX. You understand that's the effect of his evidence. And in paragraph 45 of this document, it says, when assessors stated that Father Madden had indeed informed Brother Williams of the allegation, Brother BWX agreed that in 1966, Brother Williams had spoken to him regarding the allegation that he was getting very close to a couple of people, and therefore he needed to take stock of what was happening. He warned him that he should not go one-on-one with boys or touch their genitals. And Brother BWX suggested he did not touch the genitals deliberately, but in the rub-downs he got close at times, and a couple of students thought it was getting that way. You must have been, in your role as someone who'd been on the province leadership team and who by this stage had been dealing with complaints about brothers for several years, you must have been concerned to hear that as far back as 1966, Brother Williams had that concern about Brother BWX behaving inappropriately and touching the genitals of students.
I agree.
Had that information come to your attention previously in your leadership role within the province?
Not that I can recall.
What's your first recollection of concerns being raised about Brother BWX behaving inappropriately in a sexual way with boys?
It's a long way down the track from there anyway. You may need to provide me some documents too. Jog my memory on that.
Right, I'll I'll attempt to give you some more factual context. Just while we're in this document, can we come back to please to page 0029? This is some other information that came to the attention of the Professional Standards Resource Group. In paragraph 13, it records that in 1964 a retreat was held in the parish of Koroit for CBC students. BWU attended. On the last day of the retreat in the afternoon, the priest told students to write down any questions the boys would like to ask, whether embarrassing or otherwise. The notes were put in a box, and after lunch the notes were read out. A note alleging that Brother BWX was molesting children or interfering with children was read out by the convener before he realised what was in it. He looked up and said, "Is this right? Does anyone know about this?" About half a dozen hands went up in the room. BWU states he did not write the note and does not know who did. The priest then went out of the class, and BWU states that he could not recall seeing Brother BWX again. It goes on to suggest that the priest was Father Madden, but you will have seen from his statement that he says he wasn't on that retreat. Now, is that information something that you remember being conveyed to you sometime prior to when you were investigating these charges in the 2000s?
That information wouldn't have come to me until to the best of my memory at this point, somewhere, I think, when this matter of
BWX?
Of the complainant,
Oh, yes.
in this case, not BWX, but of the complainant, was actually being processed.
So you're talking about in the early 2000s?
And when I was dealing with that, so whatever the date was for the processing of the complaint, that's when it would have come to my attention first.
So it appears from this document that the complaint was first made in about 2003. So is that when you're suggesting it was?
That was the first time I would have, yes.
Right, thank you. You know from Father Madden's statement that in 1971 he was still sufficiently concerned about what he'd heard some years earlier, that when BWX was appointed to St Patrick's College in Ballarat, Father Madden repeated his concerns and passed on his concerns to Father Davey, who was the chaplain of St Patrick's at the time. You saw that in Father Madden's statement?
I saw that.
Yeah. And was that something that came to your attention prior to 2003?
I don't recall that.
Can we have, please, tab 311? Brother, this is a very recent document of the 17th of February of this year concerning, it's a letter from CCI, the insurance body, indicating that on this question of prior knowledge, they were going to deny indemnity for claims after 1960 concerning Brother BWX because they had uncovered evidence of knowledge on the part of the province dating back to 1960. Are you aware of that?
I am.
So you've seen this correspondence?
Yep.
And if we could scroll down to the final page, it might have become a separate tab. The document reference is CTJH. That's it, thank you. This is what that conclusion was based on. It's a letter from... This is CTJH. That's it, thank you. This is what that conclusion was based on. It's a letter from the Christian Brothers St George's Terrace, which is that's the Western Australian province, is it? From August of 1960. And the letter is addressing, as it says in the first paragraph, a delicate matter. And it explains that a priest had indicated that his nephew, the brother had been asked about immoral acts in general. And it goes on to say in the third paragraph, on questioning BWX this evening, he revealed that during last year and this, he has taken boys to the visitors' room in the brother's house, got them to undress and then spoke to them of the functions of the genital organs, touching the organs during this process. This year he has acted in this way with one boy from the junior class, about 6 from the second year and 1 from grade 7. Sorry, the copy is my copy at least is very hard to read. That's better. And it's indicated the bishop will leave any action to us. I feel the first course of action would be to remove the brother from here immediately. It goes on to say in the last paragraph, I regret these unpleasant happenings and worry to you at this time. Brother transfer during the term break would not be so noticeable and would be more, and it would more easily deal with the embarrassment. Now, when did you first become aware of this communication from the Western Australian province?
A few days ago.
So until the CCI letter, you had no knowledge of this.
That's correct.
Communication. You'd agree that it's a critically important piece of information that was communicated to the provincial leadership as far back as 1960 about Brother BWX.
Yep.
And the reference in the last paragraph to facilitating the transfer during the term break so as to, in effect, minimise embarrassment. Is that an issue that you had discussed in the provincial leadership team? I'm not talking about specifically in relation to Brother BWX, but more generally, that if you needed to transfer brothers from one place to another, it was important to minimise embarrassment.
Are you talking about situations of child abuse, or are you talking about more generally, or?
Well, let's start more generally. Any situations where there might be a potential for scandal?
I'd say that any such issue would be a minor consideration. I'm not saying that no consideration would be given to that, but I'd say that would be pretty low on the scale of considerations.
But it was something that you and other members of the provincial leadership team were conscious of when you were making decisions?
Yes, we would have been conscious of that, yeah.
Can I take you please to tab 43? This is a visitation report from 1973 in relation to Ballarat. If we could go over to please to page 0068. There's a reference at the very bottom of the page to Brother BWX, and there's an indication that he was a member of the community until a week before visitation when he was changed with Peter Richardson. The change was necessitated because of the revelation of a serious act of indiscretion, even misconduct, of which he was guilty with respect to 2 of the senior boys separately. The event has taken place some months previously, but only just been reported to the superior. It goes on a few further lines down to say, a close watch will have to be kept on him in the future, for he has now at least twice offended in his conduct with boys. Unfortunately, he seems hardly to realise the seriousness of his conduct, although he says that he does. When you joined the Provincial Council in 1984, did anyone bring to your attention that this had occurred with Brother BWX back in 1973?
No.
Did anyone bring to your attention that there was a need to keep a close watch on BWX?
No.
Did you ever have any discussion with the Provincial about the need for BWX to have a close watch kept on him?
Not in respect of any sexual behaviour.
What about in other respects?
There are references in documents to BWX being a difficult person in terms of human relations, and it would have been part of some discussion from time to time how that was being managed.
But you see now from these documents that on at least 2 occasions, BWX had engaged in sexual misconduct. There seemed to be no doubt that he had committed the misconduct. He had been transferred from one place to another as a solution to the problem, but no further restrictions seem to have been put on him.
I don't know what restrictions may have been put on him.
Well, none were ever brought to your attention, were they?
None were drawn to my attention, except there was some reference in, I think, in relation to the change from Ballarat to the Provincial seeking some advice from a psychiatrist and that sort of thing, but I'm unaware of the outcome of that advice or what that might have meant in terms of any restrictions or any particular restrictions the Provincial himself might have placed on BWX.
Firstly, on the psychiatrist, are you referring there to the fact that this 1973 report says he is to resume almost immediately consultation with Dr. Seal?
I am.
But you're not aware of the outcome of those consultations?
I'm not.
Do you remember, as part of the Provincial Council consultation process, discussing appointments or transfers affecting BWX from time to time?
As a member of the leadership team, I don't recall any specific discussions.
In the course of 12 years, you'd expect.
I'm sure there would have been some.
Do you think it's appropriate that you were making decisions, albeit in an advisory capacity, about BWX without knowing this background information?
I think it would have been helpful for the whole of the leadership team to have been fully briefed on his history.
Excuse me. You were also BWX's headmaster for a period in the late 1970s, weren't you?
For 12 months.
Yes, and that was at St Kevin's in Toorak.
It was.
I take it you weren't told in your capacity as his headmaster that this issue had arisen in 1960 or that the issue had arisen in 1973 in Ballarat?
I was not.
Would you agree that in terms of your duty of care to the students at St Kevin's, that was critically important information that you should have known?
I agree wholeheartedly.
Can I have, please, tab 163 on the screen? Do you recognise this note? I can tell you it's from Michael Godfrey. You found BWW there?
Sorry?
You've found BWW on the list, and now that you know what the heading refers to, do you remember receiving this note from Michael Godfrey?
Yes.
Was that in the context of you investigating a complaint from BWW? That is, was the letter sent to you in the context?
No, it wasn't.
What prompted this note from Michael Godfrey, can you remember?
It would have been my general responsibility in terms of professional standards. It would also have been the fact that I had been headmaster at St Kevin's, and Michael Godfrey had succeeded me as headmaster at St Kevin's. Michael and I had worked together at a certain period in time on the leadership team, and I continue to work closely with Michael, even though I just finished on the leadership team, but particularly was in the context of my ongoing role in terms of professional standards.
And the effect of what Michael Godfrey was telling you was that a former student of St Kevin's, BWW, was coming to him with a complaint in 1996. And part of what he was saying to Michael Godfrey was that he had in fact come to see the Provincial back in 1981 with the same complaint. And Michael Godfrey had then inquired with the Provincial, Brother Norton, who indicated that although he couldn't specifically remember BWW, he did remember a complaint against BWX. He stated that his follow-up was to send BWX to a psychologist/psychiatrist, and that he did receive a report which claimed that following some counselling, BWX was a fit person to continue his association with young people. And that BWX had denied to Brother Norton any molestation. And he had also indicated this to Brother Norton, that he kept records had been kept until the end of his term of office, 1984. He then destroyed personal records and reports. Did you take it from that he meant to say part of what he destroyed was records and reports about this complaint in 1981?
I'd understand that to be the case.
Was that the first you'd heard that the former Provincial, Brother Norton, although he had records relating to complaints, he destroyed them in 1984?
As far as I can recall, that's the first time that I heard that formally.
Is that a practice you'd encountered by other members of the provincial leadership team?
I wouldn't have known particularly what happened between, at the changeover point from 1983, at the start of my time, in 1984. It sort of happened and I landed there as a newcomer as part of that team. I know it wasn't the practice at the time when I moved into my second period. So things were very different by then. That's perhaps all I can say on that.
Record, you're saying by then records were kept rather than destroyed?
What I'm saying is that formal archives were established about 1980. Prior to that, there were no formal archives. All that existed were a few records in a provincial office. And that wasn't uncommon actually across religious congregations across the country.
Thank you. This note goes...
Just before you go on, can I make one comment?
Yes.
Earlier I had said that probably the first knowledge I had about complaints in relation to BWX was in that 2006 or 8. But I now recall, of course, that I saw this in 1996. I'd like to correct that earlier record.
Thank you. This letter also indicates that Brother Norton had said that information relating to BWX was passed on verbally to the incoming province leader. Can you remind us who that was?
From
So from 1984.
1984, that would have been from Brother Norton to Brother Chappell.
Thank you. Did you ask Brother Chappell what information had been passed on verbally by Brother Norton about BWX?
No, I didn't. I think that I took this at face value in terms of the complaint that was being made. I don't recall, let me put it this way, I don't recall having asked Brother Chappell. I'm not saying that I didn't.
And thinking back to the 1980s, do you recall Brother Chappell telling you and the other members of the Provincial Council that there was a concern about BWX?
I don't recall that.
It's something you'd expect to remember, isn't it?
Sorry?
It's something you would expect to remember.
Well, I can only say I don't recall that.
You were actually engaged in some correspondence with CCI back in 2004, debating with them when knowledge was established within the Provincial Council for the purposes of arguing about when indemnity would apply. Is that right?
Yes.
And in fact, you succeeded in convincing CCI that the knowledge which was held by Brother Williams, that being the 1966 touching, which is referred to in the report, although he was the superior of the community at Warrnambool, couldn't be treated as knowledge of the Provincial Council. Is that right?
That's correct.
But that's now been overtaken by CCI finding out about the earlier 1960 knowledge. Thank you. Can I ask you some questions, please, about CCJ? And please check the pseudonym so that you know who we're talking about. You found that? Can we have, please, document 42? This is just while it's coming up, document 42 is a visitation report for Brunswick from 1973. If we could go over to the second page, please. You'll see there the second paragraph. CCJ found the first term very difficult as he experienced a situation very different from that in Geelong, but he recognises that the move was for his benefit. During this unsettled period, there was an indiscretion with the boy of which he realises the seriousness, and it would seem that a repetition is unlikely. Can I also please show you tab 41? And if we just scroll down to the bottom of that letter, do you recognise the signature?
Sorry.
Do you recognise who has signed off on this letter?
I'm happy to accept that as the signature of Len Francis.
Len Francis, thank you. So Len Francis has written this letter regarding CCJ. What was Len Francis's role at this time? This was 1973.
He was the superior and I think the principal of the little school at Brunswick.
Thank you. And just scrolling down a little, in the middle of that letter, he says of CCJ, very keen teacher, etc., has on 2 or 3 occasions earlier in the year been very unwise in speaking freely of sex and asked too personal questions of boys and was too familiar in his touching of the boys. He seems to have avoided such actions since. Do you recall when you joined the Provincial Council in 1984, or at any time prior to that, anyone bringing to your attention these concerns about CCJ and his behaviour with boys?
No.
When to the best of your recollection, was the first time that it came to your attention that there was a concern, and you can include in that a suspicion, that CCJ had behaved in a sexually inappropriate way with boys?
I think it really, in those specific terms that you ask, didn't surface until sometime in the 1990s, when he was not actually a member of St Patrick's Province at all.
So you can't recall.
Sorry?
You can't recall that prior to that time you had any suspicion that Brother CCJ had a problem behaving in an inappropriate way with boys?
My own personal experience didn't place me very close to him, both in terms of where I was placed before getting onto our leadership team, and then the time when I was on our leadership team prior to his going to the province in Western Australia was about 5 or 6 years. So there wasn't very much time actually there where I was exposed, if you like, to any rumours or innuendo or stories about his behaviour. There were no specific instances brought to my attention of sexual misconduct. So I'll leave it at that, I think.
Brother CCJ was sent to, among other places, Holyoake dependent treatment program in Western Australia.
I'm aware of
Are
that.
you aware of that?
Yes.
What was the reason for that?
He had issues with alcohol, and that was the primary reason for his attending a drug and alcohol program at Holyoake in Perth.
Do you remember there being any connection between concerns about his misbehaviour with children and the decision to send him to Holyoake?
Not in terms of sexual abuse.
But related to his problems with alcohol, is that what you're saying? Thank you. Excuse me. Can we have, please, document 247? And Brother Brandon, this is a letter that you wrote, and I'll come to the second page in a moment. You'll see your signature on the 21st of August 2003 to CCI, and it related to BAC and Philip Nagel, and they were victims of Stephen Farrell. Do you remember that? And the first page of this letter, you were addressing a particular suggestion that a psychiatrist, Ronald Conway, might have written a report which came to the attention of the Christian Brothers. And the effect of what you say on the first page was effectively to dispel any suggestion that the Christian Brothers had commissioned and received a report from Ronald Conway. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And you say just at point Roman 5 there, if a report by Ronald Conway had been commissioned by the Christian Brothers, and if such a report had found its way to the Provincial Superior, and if such a report clearly provided evidence of sexual abuse having taken place and being likely to continue, then it would have been acted on immediately by the Provincial in a way that would have removed Stephen Farrell from his teaching situation. And you then went over the page to address more broadly the question of whether any accusation had been made in relation to Stephen Farrell. And you say in the third paragraph there, I've spoken to the now elderly but quite alert man who was the Provincial in 1973. He states that he has no recollection whatsoever of any reporting to himself of any improper behaviour on the part of Stephen Farrell, and that he has no knowledge of any referral to Ronald Conway, much less any report from Ronald Conway in this matter. Now, is the Provincial that you're referring to there Brother Norton?
That's correct.
You knew at this time that Brother Norton's practice was that if he had any written records, he'd have destroyed them. Is that right?
When he was Provincial,
Yes.
any written records were destroyed at the end of his time as Provincial.
Yes.
Yes.
So that if, for instance, there'd been any written records relating to complaints about Stephen Farrell, they wouldn't have survived beyond 1984.
I don't think so.
Right. Didn't that give you some reason for caution about expressing any firm views about what what information had come to the attention of the Provincial prior to 1984?
I think all that I've said is if this and if that and so on, and that I didn't have any knowledge of those things. So you have to take me back to what I did say.
Well, but the question I'm asking you is, if you were relying on the fact that there were no records of a complaint about Stephen Farrell from 1973, what I'm suggesting to you is you knew that Brother Norton didn't keep the records, that he destroyed them in 1984, so that you couldn't have much confidence in the absence of records. That's what I'm suggesting to you.
That's correct. But in fact, I had asked him about the matter.
All right, so you were relying on the fact that you asked Brother Norton and you were relying on his memory.
Yes.
And you now know that to the extent that it's suggested here, Brother Norton had never received a complaint of improper behaviour on the part of Stephen Farrell. That's wrong.
That appears so.
And therefore, what you told CCI in 2003, although you may not have realised at the time, was wrong.
That may be so.
Thank you. Your Honour, I note the time.
We'll take the lunch and adjournment.
Thank you.